Okay, good morning, everybody. I think we're going to get started. The topic today is looking at the impact of the IB core on university admissions. I think this is a really cool topic to talk about. A lot of times university counselors don't know as much about some of these really technical things with the IB, but because of my previous work and roles that I've done, I've taught TOK before. I've been an extended essay supervisor, and I've had some other experiences, so I feel like I can speak about this stuff in maybe a way that's a little bit unique. I only have 10 slides today, so I'm hopeful that I won't go on as long as I normally do, and we can have some questions. What we would like to do, if I behave myself and finish with time to spare, would be we'll first start off with just sort of questions about today's topic, and then if the questions sort of die out about the core, then I'll take more general questions. Yeah. Yeah, so right now you can see I'm speaking into a microphone, and you can't hear any special microphone because this is going directly into the camera in the back. So if you're registered for today's event, you will automatically get an email from me, and you will get the YouTube video for this, and Mr. Asang has embedded the slides into the video, and then there's the link to the PDF on the YouTube page as well. Okay? All right, so we're going to look at the impact of IB core on university admissions. Sometimes maybe you've seen these models. The IB has basically this sort of program model for all 4 of their IB programs. And so today we're primarily talking about the IB diploma program. We have another program at the school. It's an IB program for the kids that are in high school, which is the IBCP, and there's a little bit of overlap with that. So I'll mention that, but today's presentation is primarily about the IB diploma. So you've got basically the different categories of the courses as that model. You've got language acquisition, studies in language and literature, individuals and societies, mathematics, the arts, and the sciences. So for the IB diploma, it's really in the tradition of the liberal arts education. Some programs allow students to become much more specialized even as early in high school. Like in A-levels, students might just take a math class and 2 science classes when they're getting their final qualifications. But if a student's doing the IB diploma, they're required to take 1 course from those 5 core academic groups, and then their 6th course can either be an arts course or it can typically be a 2nd course in the sciences or in the what they call individuals and societies, which would be the social sciences. I'd like to give a shout out to the arts quickly on this one. A lot of people think that the arts are not serious or not rigorous or something like that, but within the context of the IB, these are absolutely academic classes and they have rigor that's associated with them. I would say if you're going into a STEM course, it is a little bit harder to do an arts course in terms of the admissions requirements. Architects definitely frequently will do visual arts as part of getting into an architecture course in university, but for medicine or something like that, you're not going to be able to have an arts course. But if you are looking at doing something in the social sciences or the humanities, there's absolutely room in your program to do an arts course if you enjoy it. We were speaking to London School of Economics just the other day, and they were saying absolutely, if a student wants to take visual arts or drama or theater or film, there's a place for that in their program. And I think there's a good argument if a student wants to study something like business, doing something like film studies with an eye to thinking about marketing or something like that could be really beneficial. Then as we go further in, we've got theory of knowledge, extended essay, creativity, activity, and service. And those are what we call the IB core. Okay? So when we look at this at face value, these are the 3 components. So for theory of knowledge, you might hear it sometimes called TOK. There's 2 components to that. There's the TOK essay. And so students will write that essay and it will get mailed off. Well, now it gets scanned off and emailed off to an IB examiner. And then we have something called the TOK exhibition. That's something that's sort of internally assessed, and we get moderated for that, but our teachers are the ones primarily grading that. There's also something called the extended essay. You might hear that called EE. That's a 4,000-word research essay. And then you've got the last component, which is creativity, activity, and service, and sometimes people will call that CAS. And that's a collection of experiences within the categories of creativity, activity, and service. Now, a lot of times when people think about the core, they think about what we call the bonus points. So if you have an IB diploma, perfect score is 45 points. All right? You've got your 6 academic classes, so 6 times 7 is 42, and then you've got 3 points that are remaining. You can see here there's this sort of matrix, and so if you get an A and an A, so an A on TOK and an A on your extended essay, you can see that that's worth 3 points. You can also get an A or a B in any combination. That's still worth 3 points. So you can figure that out there. You also see that if you get an E on either one of those tasks, that's what's called an automatic failing condition. So if you get 42 points, but you fail TOK or you fail your extended essay, then you will not get your IB diploma. The other component is CAS, and it is also a pass or fail requirement. So you hear about it very randomly, very occasionally, but again, hypothetically, if someone doesn't fulfill the CAS requirements, then even if they've got 45 points, they could fail the IB diploma because they haven't fulfilled CAS. All right? So, like I said, a lot of times people will say, oh, you know, the core is worth 3 points. And the purpose of this presentation today is to try to articulate that actually it's worth a lot more than 3 points, and it's really worthy of our attention in other ways. All right, so in my opinion, the IB core is really the most important value add of the IB diploma program. It's something that's really unique compared to some of the other curriculums that universities might be looking at in terms of something like an AP or something like A-levels, because those programs don't really have these sort of components that look at these other sorts of qualities and characteristics and skills in the same way. So the IB core allows IB learners to exhibit what universities are looking for. So the first one we'll talk about later is the idea of intellectual curiosity and intellectual character. When we talk about the most selective universities in the world, they want to know who you are as a learner. They want to know what types of questions you're interested in asking. They want to know about how you think, how your brain works, and are you someone who's sort of an intellectual person. And so through having TOK and through having the extended essay, and even to a certain extent having CAS, this really creates an opportunity for students to demonstrate curiosity and intellectual character in a way that you can't through, for example, exams. Okay? Advanced research skills. We're going to talk about the extended essay. There's also research potentially that's involved in CAS as well as TOK. But for extended essay, this is really the type of research project that a lot of people would not typically see until they were in university education. Certainly for me, I would not have done some research like an extended essay until I would have been a second or third year university student in the US model. In-depth advanced subject knowledge, that's going to be something, again, that makes students stand out from a university application perspective, and that's a lot about what the extended essay is about, because it's a 4,000-word research paper. Through things like TOK and through things like the extended CAS, we also see empathy and care for others. And so both when we're looking at the United States and the UK and a lot of other places, they are trying to have students that they're going to enroll that have pro-social motivations for their education, right? If you're applying and you say, oh, I want to do this, I want to be a doctor because doctors make so much money and I want to, you know, drive a Mercedes, that's not going to be helpful for your university application. Right? They want to see that people care about other people. They want to see that this incredible education that you're going to get is you're going to be using that to make the world a better place. Community engagement, this is another thing, particularly for US universities. They want to see that if you come onto their campus, you're going to be an active person, you're going to be doing things in that community, and CAS is a huge thing to sort of say, look at how I'm engaged in my community, both maybe potentially directly with the school where I'm attending, but maybe my neighborhood, maybe Hong Kong on a larger scale. Development of soft skills like communication, collaboration, leadership, and conflict resolution. These, again, are things that universities are looking for, and they show up in the application in slightly different places. The development of resilience, perseverance, initiative, and agency. Again, universities they generally really have a pro-social mission. They want to make the world a better place. They see themselves as having a finite amount of resources. They can only accept so many students. And they want students who are going to take that education and action it and go do something with it. And so by you showing that you learned things at your school, and then you went out into the world and you made the world a better place already as a 16, 17, 18-year-old, you're saying, I have the capacity to do this. I have the agency to see things in the world that are not right and go do things to make it better. And that's attractive to universities. They're saying, you're going to be getting hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of education from us. That's an investment. We want you to go make the world a better place with that investment of resources and education. And then also, a lot of the things that students will do through CAS involve like complicated organizational work. So I'll talk about some examples later, but it's not just book learning. Organizing events. So like one of the events that we have is like the Diwali Ball, where it's sort of this community event where lots of people come on campus. That takes real world skills to sort of build the agenda for that, to do the communications with adults and sort of not just students at the schools, to sort of think about how they're going to manage the logistics of all the different dance performances, to think about things like ticket sales, to solve all of those sort of logistical problems. It's a different type of effectiveness. It's a different type of learning that's associated with typical classroom learning and sort of being successful on exams. I would add that potentially, and maybe unfairly, our community can be labeled stereotypically as a community that's really good at taking exams and maybe not much else. And so having these components like CAS is a great way to sort of push back on that negative stereotype. All right, so this is sort of the curriculum structure for the TOK course. All right, so you see that there's 82 teaching hours, and there's the core theme, which is knowledge in the knower. This course is essentially an epistemology course, and it's something that really has a big impact on sort of the intellectual character of our students. So when we talk about knowledge in the knower, we're really saying, what do we know? And how do we know it? And how certain can we be of what we know? And what they will be doing is they will be looking at things like ways of knowing, like intuition, sense perception, logic and reasoning and other things like that, and saying, how do those things impact the way that I know about the world around me? And they will investigate into things like sense perception. Like we even have sayings, right? Like seeing is perceiving, or seeing is believing, right? But when we do a deeper dive into things like our sense perceptions, we realize that maybe seeing things is actually not as reliable as we think. So a lot of times in a TOK course, for example, they will look at some really famous studies of how like first eye witnesses are actually not that reliable. And there's lots of examples of people where they said they saw something, either in a real life setting or in a controlled psychological setting, and we will find out that their perception of what happened is actually not very accurate at all. So they'll explore those ideas, and then they will explore them through what are called the areas of knowledge. So history, human sciences, natural sciences, the arts, and mathematics. And so they'll say, what does it mean to know something in physics? What does it mean to know something in history? How is that different? As a historian, what tools, what strategies, what techniques can you use to have your level of certainty in your knowledge be more secure? Can a historian ever be as certain in their knowledge as a physicist or as a mathematician? All right? As a mathematician, what are potentially some sources of bias? What are some potential sources of things that could get into our reasoning? A lot of our students, particularly, they will say, oh, like the hardcore sciences like physics and chemistry and math, they're purely logical, and we know things much more securely, and there's no mistakes in those things, where the social sciences are really maybe fluffy and they never really know anything. And through a course like TOK, they'll do much more of a deep exploration, and they'll realize that actually there can be significant sources of error and misunderstanding even in objective subjects like mathematics or physics. And so they'll do an exploration of that. these are some examples of the two components to the course. So for the essay titles are issued to students. So the essay titles will change from year to year, and at a certain month, I don't know what it is off the top of my head, the students who will be the graduating class of 2026, they will get issued with their essay titles. And so I think there's something like 8 titles that they can choose from. And so everyone around the world in the Northern Hemisphere will have those same essay titles that they can choose from. So here's 2 examples of the types of questions that would be an essay question for theory of knowledge. How important are the opinions of experts in the search for knowledge? Answer with reference to the arts and one other area of knowledge. All right? Is the division of the natural sciences and mathematics into separate areas of knowledge artificial? So these are some pretty heavy questions. We're asking 16, 17-year-old kids to deal with some pretty heavy intellectual lifting. And I think it's one of the things that universities really appreciate about the IB diploma, that if a student has the capacity to take on questions like this and have a really robust answer, that's something that demonstrates sort of what they're going to be able to contribute in the classroom. All right? The exhibition, that is not something where we're given prompts specifically, so students will come up with their own prompts. So the assignment has sort of a structure and requirements and components to it, but these would be examples of student-initiated exhibition prompts. So, is bias inevitable in the production of knowledge? Should some knowledge not be sought on ethical grounds? How can we distinguish between knowledge, belief, and opinion? And then, no, I think I mistaked that. I think these are actually provided as prompts, and then students will come up with their own structure. So if you take a look around the room, you see some artifacts from a previous TOK exhibition at our school. I think I misspoke. This is a new syllabus that I didn't deliver. The TOK exhibition has only been around for 2 or 3 years. It was a different task previously. But if you want, at the end of our session, you can look and you can see, does some knowledge belong only to particular communities? That's the prompt that was used for a poster that I can see there. So for the TOK exhibition, students will prepare that exhibition, then other members of the community will sort of like walk around and come up to their booth, and they will ask them to sort of explain their artifacts and ask them for the ways in which they've sort of investigated that particular prompt. All right, I'm not going to read all of this, but something that people don't know about the IB diploma that's different with our grading than other systems is for the IB, our grades are on a 1 to 7 score. Okay? 1 is a very, very low level of achievement, and it's relatively uncommon for students to get a 1. And then 7 is a very, very high level of achievement, and it's very, very difficult to get a 7. Now, in some other systems, you might have an A, a B, or a C, and that A or a B or a C is only associated with percentages. So in my community, we would have said an A is 90% or higher. Okay? In the IB, we have some of that in terms of exams and things like that, in terms of like grade boundaries on particular tasks. But underlying that, we have grade descriptors. And so for each of the IB subjects, they have general grade descriptors, and it's this long paragraph that says what a 7 is supposed to look like. Okay? So there's one of these. And this is from the sciences. So there's one for 7, there's one for 6, there's one for 5, there's one for 4, etc. And then they would have them for other subjects as well. And so if you simply say, oh, a 90% is an A, the problem with that is 90% of what, right? It could be questions like 2 plus 2 equals what. So if I'm getting those questions right, it's not a very hard exam. Right? So I can get an A on that. Whereas by having this criteria, it talks about what the level of performance is supposed to look like. All right? When we look at this, we see some of these things linking back to TOK shows insight or originality. So in the answers that you have on the tasks, maybe for the internal assessments or specific types of essay questions on an exam, you're showing insight or originality. If you're doing investigations in a science course or maybe perhaps a course like psychology, are you demonstrating that you have an understanding of ethics and you're doing your investigations in an ethical manner? Perhaps are you doing a little bit of a comment or a reflection about your experimental design to indicate that you've taken into ethics in your experimental design? Investigations demonstrate insight and independence to design and complete innovative practical work with highly competent investigative and analytical techniques and with innovative and effective conclusions to resolve authentic problems. So if I'm acting as a scientist, I'm thinking about experimental design and I'm thinking about flaws in my experiment, and I'm acknowledging sources of error in my experiment. And so I might be, again, going back to TOK and, for example, thinking about sense perception, right? I'm doing a physics experiment and I'm supposed to observe something. I might think, you know what, are my eyes and my senses accurate to observe what I want to actually observe? And so I might, instead of just eyeballing something, maybe I will videotape something so that I can actually slow down the video, or I can pause the video, or I can zoom in so I can have a higher level of accuracy, for example, than just sort of looking at something. So through students thinking about how we know and sources of possible error or bias in their knowing, as a result of applying that TOK thinking, they are going to have much more sophisticated work in that course, which then will allow them to have access to the 6 and 7 bands in terms of the grades. All right, the next one is the extended essay. It's a 4,000-word research paper, and importantly, it's in the field of study. It's not about a field of study. So it's not a report about Einstein's contribution to physics, okay? Instead, you are doing research in that field, how people from that field actually do research. So here are some examples. So these are real titles, not of WIS students, but real titles of extended essay titles from students, okay? I don't even know how to read this one, but when solutions of a positive-negative glucose or a negative-negative fructose are mixed, is there a relationship between the observed rotation of polarized light caused by this mixture and the concentration of the constituent monosaccharide solutions? All right, so right off the bat, you're seeing that they're applying some pretty sophisticated subject knowledge, and they're applying some pretty sophisticated experimental techniques, and they're applying some pretty sophisticated subject-specific vocabulary even within the title of their essay. So the student then, they will work with a mentor. At West Island School, all students will be assigned a mentor for their extended essay, and they work on their extended essay for approximately 6 months. And so they will go through a process of sort of brainstorming and thinking about some possible sort of essay titles, and then they will meet with their mentor. Their mentor will give them feedback about whether that essay title is a good title in terms of whether it's viable or not, whether it's structured in a way that will allow them to score well or not, and then they will go about doing the research. For psychology, a comparative evaluation of 2 therapy theories, specifically the transference-focused psychotherapy theory and dialectical behavior theory, focused on the treatment of borderline personality disorder. English, attitudes towards human spirituality in Goethe's Faust and Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. And then mathematics. What curve between 2 points with different horizontal and vertical coordinates yields the fastest time of descent for a point like mass following the curve between those 2 points under the force of gravity alone? So these are really sophisticated essay titles. One of my previous students, he went to study economics at University of Chicago, and I remember for his extended essay, he wrote about, he was doing an investigation into, we were in Bangkok, and sometimes in big cities, they've got special bus lanes where only the bus can use those lanes. And so basically, he was using calculus to look at optimized flow rates to see if these bus lanes improved efficiency in the horrible Bangkok traffic situation. So you can see a little bit, I think, why a university admissions officer, when they see this as the type of work that students are doing, as opposed to me saying, oh, he got a 98% on a test, or she got a 95% on a test, or whatever, This is the type of work that we're looking for students to do at the university and graduate level, and it's got sort of a higher level of agency and sort of curiosity and sort of intellectual character to it, because students have some control, obviously, over what they're investigating and what questions they want to ask. So we learned something about this English student when we hear that they wanted to do a comparison of these two texts. We know about maybe what their interests are in literature, and as an admissions officer looking for people on a literature course, I can think about whether they'd be a good fit for our program or not. All right, for CAS, CAS is creativity, activity, and service, all right? And when we talk about creativity, it can be the arts, and I think it's really lovely when it is the arts. So if a student is taking violin lessons or taking ballet lessons or something like that, that absolutely can be creativity. Painting can be creativity, but other things can be creativity as well. So any kind of writing can be creativity. Things that really involve problem solving can be creativity. So Model United Nations can be creativity. Entrepreneurship competitions can be creativity. It's a broad definition. I would be hopeful that I think all people would include some element of the arts, but it doesn't have to be just painting and singing and dancing. Next one is activity, and that requires normally something sort of physical that will get you sweating. So all of these things you can do exclusively through West Island School if you want. We offer a program after school where you can just sign up from the menu of things that we're doing, or you can say, I want to start my own club or organization as well. Or you can also do things outside of school as well. So if you're like my daughter is doing ballet with the Jean M. Wong Ballet School. So she can count that towards her CAS, for example. The other thing that's cool with this is that you can do things together. So ballet is activity, but ballet is also creativity. So students can do things where they're combining things. And then the last one is providing a real service to others to address a need or a problem without receipt or payment. So you can see potentially how you could do one task where it's a combination of all three. You could be doing something physically to help other people. I really love football, and I put on a football clinic once a month for an underprivileged community. So I'm providing a service, I'm planning the workshops, and I'm planning the activities for the kids, and then I'm physically running around playing football with them. So I can address all three of those through sort of one task. These are some examples of real CAS things that I've seen over the years. So a fashion show highlighting sustainable fashion through upcycling donated clothes with proceeds going to an environmental charity. So the students organize a campaign to collect or have people donate used clothes. Then they utilize sewing machines and other things like that to sort of upcycle the clothes. Then they organize an event in a school auditorium. They get maybe an NGO to come and sort of present on the topic. And then they sell the clothing and or sell tickets to the fashion show to raise money and raise awareness about the issue. Modifying open source schematics to 3D print custom-made prostheses for amputees who are victims of landmines. So this is a real one that was at my old school. We have a 3D printer here at our school as well. So the students accessed the 3D printer. They got online and they found open source schematics for like prosthetic hands and things like that. We were in Thailand, so some of our neighboring communities, they had unfortunately had situations with landmines historically, and so they have populations of people who've lost limbs and things like that. They partnered with one of the Queen's foundations, and they started getting clients, and they were basically printing custom-made prostheses and assembling them for people who really had this need. So that's a great example of service and creativity. The student who oversaw that got accepted to continue on doing similar work with that at Johns Hopkins University. Running a campaign to petition the local government to ban single-use plastics. This is another real one. So some students at, I forget which school, but one of the main, maybe the Green School or one of the main international schools in Bali, they organized a campaign, and they played a significant role about raising awareness about the problems of the use of single-use plastics in Bali specifically, and they helped the community basically enact things where you're not getting plastic bags every time you get something in 7-Eleven or something like that. All right, this is my last slide. I'm doing a great job. I'm not going to go for the full hour today. I'm proud of myself. Okay, so where does the course show up in the application? All right, so for the United States, Common App is going to be probably about, 99% of our applications, or maybe 95% of our applications. On the Common App, the Common Application, which is used by almost all of the universities in the United States, there's a specific section where it asks you to put in 10 activities. Okay? So you put in the name of your activity, and then I think you've got about 150 characters to explain what the activity and what, why it was important. So you have that as an opportunity. MIT does the same thing. I think they've got 4 slots instead of 10. And the UCs on their platform, again, they have something similar. There's a place for you to sort of curate specific activities that you want to highlight. We also have written pieces for Hong Kong. We have written pieces for the United States. We've got written pieces for the UK. For the UK and Hong Kong, the structure of our personal statement is, what do you want to study and why? What evidence do you have that you're academically prepared to be successful on the course? And that's going to be about 80% of the personal statement. And then, sort of, what are some evidence that you have of kind of soft skills like communication skills, leadership skills from other maybe non-related things like playing, badminton and things like that. And then we have a conclusion. So you can see both how the extended essay and maybe TOK and CAS can plug into that evidence for academic preparation. You talking about what you did on your extended essay as evidence for the fact that you're ready for that university course, is a good example. Or when I talked about that young man who wanted to study and it was like biotechnology or biomechanical engineering or something, talking about the program that we're doing with prostheses, he can plug that into, that evidence section, right? And then in the soft skills section, kids are talking about, when we organized the end of year dance, when we organized this fundraiser, I needed to collaborate with other people and develop these collaboration skills, et cetera. In the US, we've got that Common App essay, the main essay, and then we've also got the supplemental essays. So if you're doing Common App, there's about 8 titles, and you choose one of those for a 650-word essay, and you might, for example, talk about a CAS experience, or you could talk about something like that. Similarly, frequently there's maybe 3 to 4 supplemental essays, and again, this would be a good specific thing. We're talking about anecdotal evidence. So a lot of students will want to say, oh, I'm really passionate about science. Well, why do I believe you, right? You say, I'm really passionate about science, and then you've got an anecdote to give. So, for example, one of my old students, he's currently studying to get a PhD in political science at University of Michigan. And so he might have wanted to say that he was passionate about political science. Well, for his CAS, he maintained a blog about Thai politics. And his blog got so big that he would get retweeted by the BBC, and he got interviewed by the BBC as a student, during one of the political crises that we were having at the time. So, you don't want to just say, like, oh, I'm passionate about this subject, and then say, I hope you believe me. You can say, look at this really cool thing I made. Look at this really cool thing I did. Look at all these cool competitions that I did, to sort of provide that evidence. We also have interviews. Interviews, to be honest with you, are relatively limited. So we have some small-scale interviews that will happen here in Hong Kong. For the UK, they're quite limited. There's just really pretty much Oxford, Cambridge, and a couple other schools, or a couple other schools and programs. And then we do have medicine and dentistry and vet will typically have an interview. But the supercurriculars that you would be doing to get prepared for your medical school application, again, those will plug into your CAS because you're doing things like creativity and service, most likely, right? So, you're in charge of the Red Cross first aid group, and you help provide sort of first aid services during sports day and things like that, you can talk about how in real life you gave students medical services, when they twisted their ankle on sports day. And you could talk about how you managed your emotions and how you asked them questions. So again, that would really feed into the objectives. And then that last one is, again, that idea that students who are applying this TOK understanding to their work, they're accessing these sort of higher order thinking skills. And so that's the type of work that's expected to be completed, to be getting into that 6-7 band for our courses. All right, I think that's my last slide. So that's what I have for that. Like I said today, if people want to start, we can certainly start with questions about the core or sort of anything that I talked about in the presentation. If you want to go to work, you're very welcome to go to work right now. And then if we've gone through those questions and people just had sort of other questions, I'd be happy to field those as well. Any questions about today's presentation? Yeah.
I'm kind of, I'm not very sure about the CAS requirement. So is the requirement is by hours, which means, for example, if I do the service, community service, is it that I do it once or twice? That means I fulfill the requirement, or is it by hours? How many hours I need to do to that means I fulfill the requirement?
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation around this, and part of it has to do with the fact that the requirement was different historically, but like a long time ago. If I'm not mistaken, in sort of one of the original, for the IB they do curriculum review. So basically you'll see that there's a new sort of syllabus that will get issued something like every 7 years or something. So you will see this year we've got a new ESS course. So the kids who are in year 12 are sitting a different ESS course than the kids who are in year 13. The syllabus is in the last year for year 13 and the first year for year 12. But for CAS, one of the earliest iterations of it, you needed to do 50 hours, I believe, of creativity, 50 hours of activity. They used to call it action back then, and then 50 hours of service. That's not true anymore. So now you maintain a CAS portfolio, and you have essentially learning objectives. So I don't know them off the top of my head, but it's sort of like interacting with global issues, exploring ethical issues, collaborating with others. It's those types of things. And so there's a number of those things, and you basically maintain a portfolio where you write reflections, and to pass or fail is to show that you've engaged with those sort of themes in an appropriate way over time. So you have to sort of have enough creativity, enough activity, enough service, and then each one of those objectives has to be fulfilled across your program. I've also heard sometimes people say, oh, like, I'm done with CAS. I finished CAS in the first semester. I did everything already. That's both not good from a university admissions perspective. When we interact with universities, for example, you may get deferred. So maybe you apply early decision, and they say, you're really good. We're just not quite sure if we want to accept you right now, so we're going to push you into the regular decision pool. Typical thing that you would do at that time, you would do what's called a letter of continued interest. And in the letter of continued interest, you would say, this is what I've been up to since I last talked to you through my application, right? So if you sort of like finished with CAS, then you don't really have anything to talk about in that letter of continued interest. And we would use letter of continued interest both with a deferral as well as sometimes with a waiting list candidate, all right? But more so, the IB also explicitly says that it needs to be an ongoing thing through the 2-year process. So obviously, as we get into mock exams and things like that, everything sort of winds down. But really, students be engaged with CAS certainly all the way to probably about February. Okay. Yeah. So the question is about basically sort of what's the timeline for these, for the core. So in terms of CAS, a lot of IB schools, including ours, we will sort of generically refer to all of our kind of after-school programs as CAS. And so if your children are in the MYP program or you're doing IGCSEs, et cetera, they can engage in CAS already. So there's after-school clubs and sports and MUN and all that sort of stuff. So again, they can start building their resume from a university perspective whenever they want to. In terms of TOK and CAS, those are things that start when you're in the IB diploma program. For IBCP students, they will do CAS as well, but they don't have TOK and they don't have extended essay. They have something that's called the reflective project, which would sort of in some ways be similar to the extended essay. I don't know as much about that, but basically they write an essay where they explore an ethical issue in the field that they're interested in. So like if they're interested in going into business or they're interested in going into film or interested in going into digital design, then their essay would focus on that sort of ethical issue. So maybe they're doing something with film or design and they're looking at the ethics of using AI or something like that. So in terms of the timeline, I don't know our timeline perfectly because I'm relatively new to the school, but my understanding is it's pretty typical that students would engage in a process where around January or February, they would indicate through like a survey, maybe 2 or 3 choices that they would like. In most schools, including ours, we can't fulfill all of the requests because students are more likely to request certain subjects than others. So you can't say everyone gets to do exactly what they want. So students will submit 2 to 3 subjects, and then one of the other ones that we have is world studies, which allows students to do something that's sort of interdisciplinary, which makes it a little bit easier to supervise. You don't have to have that same level of technical expertise to support the student. So if I'm not mistaken, I think our students know probably who their supervisor is and what their topic is, probably around like March, something like that. And then they would be heading towards having like an outline in the spring, and then they would be probably heading towards having maybe a first rough draft towards the end of the academic year. I know that either as part of the Group 4 Science Week or the exams week, students will have a specific day dedicated to working on their extended essays right around this time. With all IB assessments, there's a structured component to it in terms of supervision. So you can't provide unlimited support. You're supposed to have a certain number of meetings with your extended essay supervisor. And when the extended essay supervisor signs off on your extended essay, they have to say how many hours that they met with you, sort of the nature of your support. And there's another document that the student submits where they basically write a small reflection about sort of what they're actioning based upon those consultations. And I think teachers are only allowed to give 1 round of written feedback on the extended essay. The vast majority of our students will be done with their extended essays by late September, early October at West Island School. I know that because we need to have predicted extended essay grades for those super early applications for Oxford, Cambridge, and UK Medicine, which is October 15th. Some students are not quite done by that point. For TOK, they do the exhibition in the spring of year 12, and then they do their essay in the early part of the fall of year 13. And the extended essay is not a course. It's just you meet with your mentor independently, you schedule your own appointments, et cetera. Whereas with TOK, they have it timetabled. So you saw on that chart that we've got expected teaching hours. So there's supposed to be 50 hours spent on exploring the areas of knowledge and 32 instructional hours on looking at those optional themes and sort of knowledge, the concept of knowledge and the knower. So that is a course, yeah. So because of the fact that it's a course, they're engaging in like mock versions of the essay and like other sort of similar types of tasks. So they have enough engagement with that course that they should be able to sort of think about applying those things in other coursework, as well as, like I said, making reference to them potentially, in a personal statement or essay. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So the question is basically, what's the timeline for the Higher Education and Careers offices interacting with students at West Island School? So our team is 3 people with assistance of Ms. Kalyan, who's our office administrator. And at West Island School, the counseling model is that we're each responsible for 2 dynasties. So I'm Ching and Song, Ms. Ghosh is Han and Ming, and Ms. Chung is Tang and Yuan. And so when a child is in year 7, they already have an assigned counselor. But we don't have the capacity to work as intensely with all students across, the whole year 13, the whole program at West Island. So in terms of our model, we will probably do 1 assembly a year with the younger years. And so we will talk to the head of year about that. And we'll sort of talk about who we are as a team, what our resources are. What we're trying to do is get students to interact a little bit more with our platform called Unifrog. That's certainly something that they can relatively independently engage with and sort of have some exploration around. So we kind of do about like 1 assembly a year with that. Students and families will engage us specifically sometimes, and you're welcome to do that if you have specific issues. So I would say for the typical student, it's not really that necessary. The types of people that are interacting with us earlier would be where they have some sort of very specific or complex need. So I'm doing a bit of extra work with people who want to do like Division I sports in the United States. Like they want to get a scholarship to play, like there's a very talented fencer at our school right now who has a good chance to potentially be a Division I athlete for fencing. There's a student this year who got accepted to run track at a school in the United States. So that would be stuff that would be too late to start talking about in second semester of year 12. We'd want to be talking about that earlier. So there's a couple cases like that. And then there would be other, maybe people who are interested in very specific countries. So in my experience, probably the 2 countries that are more complex for applying to would be Germany and South Korea. And so families that are sort of targeting those places, they might start interacting with our office a little bit earlier to sort of backward plan into those applications. We also do some work with families where maybe the child has special needs. So it could be special needs in the sense that they maybe not go to a traditional university and they want to be planning for some sort of vocational option, or they might want to be planning for some sort of modified post-secondary schooling experience. And then also with that would be maybe students who are particularly gifted and they're looking for different types of enrichment activities, above and beyond that. So that's been something that we've been collaborating with Dr. Yu on in terms of like looking for sort of special experiences and special extension programs, enrichment programs outside of the school. And there's going to be a new person in that role for next academic year. We also have students who are applying to selective summer school programs, and so they would then interact with our office for that. So we'll basically support that more or less in the same way we would a university application. So if the student wants to draft a essay that's part of the application process, we can draft that essay with them. If they need help completing the application form, and they've got questions, because it'll say like, what's your GPA, or other maybe American things that they don't know, so we can help them with that. In year 9, we have a career fair. So we're going to have a career fair next week on Friday, where we have 19 different people coming in. So it'll be for 2 periods, and the students will sign up for that in advance, and they will get to go to 4 sessions. And so they'll rotate through different careers. We have ongoing university visits and career speakers. So I would say probably maybe about 3 to 4 times a month on average, we will either have a university rep come and speak, or we will have someone who we've organized who's a career speaker. So the university ones tend to be lunchtime sessions from 1:20 until 2 o'clock We'll get into a classroom, kids can eat their lunch, and it will be like a representative. So we've had NYU, we've had Norwich College of the Arts, we've had USC, we've had, I don't know why I'm blanking, University of Manchester. We also have local Hong Kong universities. The Hong Kong ones typically will come in for a specific faculty. So we'll have lots of universities. Universities are most likely going to be from the US, Canada, and Hong Kong. It's a little bit less common that we have countries other than that. Those are the three countries that are most actively recruiting. And then we've got a university fair. So the university fair happens every year in September. The way that we have that structured would be year 11 comes off timetable and they get to go to the fair for one session. Year 12 does the same, and then we've got sort of an open period. It depends on when we have it timetabled. So this year, lunchtime was open to anybody who wanted to come, and parents also get invited to that event as well. So we had 150 universities from about 8 different countries this year in September, and then we're getting that set up already for September next year, and I think we're going to be between 150 and 160 universities for that. If you see on the door over there, you've got QR codes next to our names. And so when we have our assemblies with students, for example, we say, if you want to make an appointment with us, you can come and scan our QR code. That opens an app called Calendly, and they can see when we're busy and when we're free on our calendar, and then they can book a 30-minute appointment with us. Or they can just come in and talk. Our department is super, super collaborative. So if a kid comes, the first question isn't like, oh, what dynasty are you? Oh, you're in Han, you're with Miss Go, she's not here, go away. We're not like that. So anybody will help you if you come into the office. We get a little bit more specialized once we get really close to sort of the applications, just because there's a lot more background knowledge into an individual student. So if it's a general question, then we'll obviously help whoever comes in at that point. If it's something more nuanced or specific about their application, then they typically need to wait. But yeah, anybody who comes to the office will get help from any of the three of us. Okay? For next year, I don't know what happened this year. I think that I had a little bit of bad luck. What we did, and my intention is to do the same thing, is around maybe the second week of school, I sent out a Google form to all parents, and it said sort of like, these are, 15 topics that we're thinking about for possible coffee and college sessions. You can vote about which ones you think are most interesting, and then we also had like an other sort of box. And then we didn't do a pure vote, but we looked at what people sort of said that they were important, what they thought was important. And then we also had a little bit of a voice, which we thought like, well, this is stuff that we kind of really need to do. Then early September, end of August, we sort of sent out a registration, and we had relatively low response rate. I think it must have just been a busy time for people, and people missed it. And then we ended up resending out the Google form, I think it was in November, and then all of a sudden our registrations went way up. So I think next year I'll put on my calendar to sort of resend out that registration. I'll probably send out an email like maybe 3 or 4 times in the academic year, because there's been people at the end of the year who are saying, oh, I didn't know that these sessions were going on. So it's really wonderful when we have people come in, because I think it makes the sessions more dynamic and you ask questions, and so that makes it better. But we have really good participation with the YouTube channel as well. So that's great to see. Some of the more popular topics, more than 200 people have watched those. So for us, I think what this is about is trying to get you timely information and helping you sort of be armed with information so that you're in a great position to help support your children. And I think another objective is, this is a really emotional and stressful topic, and the goal is that hopefully we can build a relationship with each other where we can get to know each other a little bit better, and hopefully you can say, oh, I've met Mr. Hirsch, I've met Ms. Chung, I've met Ms. Ghosh, like they're a competent person, they care about their job, they want to do a good job, they're knowledgeable, and that will mean that when you're experiencing a difficulty or a stress or something like that, that you will have faith that we're acting in what we believe is your best interest, and you'll reach out to us so we can, solve problems sooner than later, so little problems don't become don't become big problems. And similarly, if you hear rumors about secret tips for university, or how you have to hire such and such an agent because they can guarantee that they're going to get you into this university, that you can reach out to us and ask us to sort of reaffirm information or clarify on stuff. Okay? Any other questions for today? All right, great. Thank you so much for coming. And hopefully I'll see some of you again next year when we do our new sessions next year. I can't believe it's the end of the academic year already. That was quick. So thank you.